Some interesting stories you need to know in Nigeria. The story of how Murtala Muhammad was killed on the streets of Lagos. On the 13th of February in 1976, General Ramat Murtala Muhammad was assassinated on his way to work by some military men who were loyalists of the then head of the Nigerian Army Physical Training Corps, Lulte Kol Buka Suka Dimka. Late General Murtala Muhammad was born on the 8th of November 1938 in Kano to Risqua Mohammed and Uwani Rahamat. He was the 9th out of 11 children and attended Barewa College in Zaria, where he graduated in 1957. General Murtala joined the Nigerian Army in 1958 at about 20 years of age and went to Sandhurst Royal Military Academy in England, where he was trained as an officer cadet. He was also a federal minister commissioner for communications. General Murtala took over power as the military head of Nigeria on the 29th of July, 1975, when General Yakubu Gowon was overthrown while he was at the 12th summit of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in Kampala, Uganda. Murtala was notably known for his simple lifestyle, which many believed led to his death as he was without escort at the point of his assassination. He was also known to be keen on restructuring. At a point, he reduced the total number of active Nigerian soldiers by 100,000. He approved Abuja as the new federal capital territory on February 5, 1976, due to the overcrowding of Lagos, the then capital. He also created 7 states 10 days before his untimely death. His assassination. On 13 February 1976, General Muhammad set off for work along his usual route on George Street. Shortly after 8 a.m., his Mercedes-Benz car traveled slowly in the infamous Lagos traffic near the Federal Secretariat at Ikoyi in Lagos, and a group of soldiers, members of an abortive coup led by Dimka, emerged from an adjacent petrol station, ambushed the vehicle, and assassinated Muhammad. Murtala Muhammad was killed, aged 37, along with his aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Akintunde Akinsehinwa, in his black Mercedes-Benz saloon car on 13th of February 1976. The car was ambushed en route to his office at Doton Barracks, Lagos. The only visible sign of protection was a pistol carried by his orderly, making his assassination an easy task. The assassination was part of an attempted coup led by Late Kol Buka Suka Dimka. He was executed on 15th May 1976 at the Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison in Lagos for treason. He was succeeded by the Chief of Staff, Supreme HQ Olusegun Obasanjo, who completed his plan of an orderly transfer to civilian rule by handing power to Shehu Shagari on 1st October 1979. Today, Muhammad's portrait adorns the 20 Naira note, and Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos is named in his honor. Thanks for your time, and don't forget to follow us. How and why Kudarat Abiola? The wife of MKO Abiola was brutally assassinated in 1996. Alhaja Kudarat Abiola, a politically and socially active woman during her days, was the beautiful wife of late business mogul and respected politician Chief Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola. Her struggles, efforts, and the tireless support she gave her husband, MKO Abiola, when he was incarcerated, led to her untimely death. On the 4th of June 1996, Kudarat Abiola was assassinated by some gunmen in Lagos who allegedly acted on the orders of the Sani Abacha's military junta. Her background. After President Ibrahim Babangida annulled the June 12, 1993 election, which had MKO Abiola as the winner, several riots ensued across the country. especially in the southwest. This led to the demise of President Babangida's military regime and the birth of the Shonakan-led interim national government on the 26th of August, 1993. Before Babangida stepped down from power, he set up an interim government which was to oversee the transition of power to a democratically elected government. Kofo Abayomi did not support the interim government, as it had no plan of restoring him as the president of Nigeria. The interim national government was later sacked by General Sani Abacha in November 1993. At first, Kofo Abayomi supported Sani Abacha's military regime, hoping Abacha would return the mandate to him. But when the Abacha refused to do so, Kofo Abayomi went ahead to declare himself as the president on the 11th of June, 1994. 12 days later, he was arrested and charged with treasonable felony. Kudarat Abiola spearheaded oil workers' strike against the government, which lasted 12 months. She also gathered market women, students, and civil servants to fight for their electoral right, which was denied on June 12, 1993. Her efforts to get her husband out of jail and restore his mandate brought her across the line of Abacha's military government. Unknowing to Kudarat Abiola, she had been marked for assassination by an unknown cabal. On the 4th of June, 1996, Alhaja Kudarat Abiola was in a white Mercedes-Benz driven by her driver, Dauda Atanda, and accompanied by her special assistant, Lateef Shofolahan. It was around 9:30 a.m. on the streets of Lagos. She was going for an appointment at the Canadian High Commission. As her car slowed down on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway past the 7-Up bus stop on Oregon Road in Ikeja, 2 cars double-crossed them, and 6 heavily armed men opened fire on Kudarat Abiola's car. The gunman shot at close range, and Kudarat's driver got his mouth and shoulder pierced by a bullet, while Kudarat, their main target, was hit in the forehead and instantly lost consciousness. She was rushed to the Echo Hospital on Mobolaji Bank Anthony Way in Ikeja, Lagos, where she eventually died between 12:15 and 12:30 p.m. However, Kudarat's personal assistant, Lateef Shofolahan, escaped the attack unhurt. He was later accused of being involved in the murder plot of Kudarat Abiola. Old Niger gathered that prior to Alhaja Kudarat Abiola's murder, there were 2 attempts to take her life before the plotters allegedly penetrated her network through Lateef Shofolahan. After the assassination, the Abacha military government offered the sum of $45,000 to anyone who could give information leading to the arrest of the assassins. Later, Hamza al-Mustafa, the chief security officer of General Sani Abacha, was accused and convicted. Investigations into the killing traced the killer's bullets to his, Hamza al-Mustafa, personal armory. In October 1988, Hamza al-Mustafa and Mohammed Abacha, General Abacha's son, appeared before the court, both charged with the death of Kudarat Abiola. In the court, Muhammad Abdul, one of the assassins, narrated how the Abiola's network was penetrated through Lateef Shofolahan and how Mohammed Abacha gave him and other gunmen $10,000 to flee the country when Obasanjo's government began an investigation on Kudarat Abiola's assassination. Another member of the killer squad, Barnabas Jabila aka Sergeant Rogers, confessed that he was acting on the orders of Hamza al-Mustafa and that he, Hamza al-Mustafa, gave the contract to kill Kudarat Abiola to Rabo Lawal, the head of the mobile police force at the presidential villa. He also said that they were provided weapons for the operation in the presence of Mohammed Abacha. In May 2001, a federal high court in Abuja freed Mohammed Abacha on the ground that he was simply roped in on circumstantial evidence. Also, Hamza al-Mustafa and Lateef Shofolahan, who were sentenced to death by hanging on January 30, 2012, were later freed on Friday, July 12, 2013, on the ground that there was not enough evidence to prove them guilty. Alhaja Kudarat Abiola's assassination remains one of the top assassinations in Nigeria. Credit, Old Naya.
Story of Kola Olawuyi, the investigative journalist who exposed Reverend King and other evil people. When Kola Olawuyi died in 2007 at the age of 44, I knew quite a few people that shed tears. The man once ruled the airwaves with his Iriaye radio program that I grew up to. When it's 8 p.m. on Fridays in the southwest, it's normal to see a lot of people huddled up around radio sets, in street corners, homes, and electricians' workshops as they listen to Kola Olawuyi's program. It was a weekly ritual we grew up to. Kola Olawuyi was larger than life. The number of cases he tracked down and brought to life have not been done by anyone else around here since his death. No one has ever had that kind of confidence since Reverend King's case was brought to light by him. Churches whose owners buried people alive in their buildings as rituals to draw crowd. A lot of cases of abused children and people claiming to be witches to hurt others. Ajala underground killing houses stories where kidnappers then were raided by him and brought to light. Blood ritual killings and ritualists in the southwest Ek. There was a woman called Malika that said she was God and created everyone and could do what she liked with anyone until Kola Olawuyi dragged her to light and more. The man was fearless and appeared unstoppable. Listening to him was scary and exciting. On one hand, you admired his courage. On the other, you feared for his life. It wasn't surprising then that when he died, a lot of people's default setting was, oh, they got him finally. Perhaps even he had that thought at the back of his mind, hence, at the end of every show, he'd always say, Amabe or Beni Beshu Atelese Abeno. Embanyamo Bonikan Lani Debanle will always go out to work. It's those that don't want us to return that we won't meet when we return. His life was a mystery too, even though he was a member of the Redeemed Christian Church. The number of occultic cases and ritual killers he took on and exposed made people believe he was occultic himself. When news of his death broke, the default reaction from most people was that the witches and ritualists he exposed finally got him and killed him. Some said he cut a tree around his house after he was warned not to, hence his death. Others said some occultic groups that he belonged to even cut off his head after his death because it belonged to them. In the end, to lay all of that to rest, his family had to have an open burial and open casket for the 44-year-old so everyone could see that he died of natural causes and wasn't mutilated or anything. But again, he wrote the mystery angle really hard too while he was alive. Maybe he even talked with it. Whenever it was 8 p.m. on Fridays and you heard Hubert Ogunde's Shigbawo open the occultic calabash start playing on Kola Olawuyi's Iriraye program, you knew it was going to be a tough night. Continue to rest in peace.
Story of the Nigerian who changed his family name just to marry a widow. In 1930, he is the man Kofo Abayomi Street in Victoria Island. Lagos was named after. Old Nigeria was filled with assassinations and coups. This is a story of assassination and love. Lagos lawyer Moronfolu Abayomi was shot dead in a Lagos courthouse at the Tinubu Square on August 25, 1923, 3 months and 15 days after his wedding day. Abayomi's killer was a popular Lagos entrepreneur and big boy, Doro Delfonso, from the renowned Delfonso family. Delfonso was having a legal battle with his insurance company, and the case was taken to court. The insurance company then hired a young and vibrant lawyer, Barrister Moronfolu Abayomi. As the case proceeded, the young barrister was able to prove clearly that Delfonso committed arson on his home and business in order to defraud the insurance company. On August 25, 1923, when Delfonso was being led out of the court to begin his prison sentence, the convict shot Abayomi with a revolver and turned the same gun and shot himself. Barrister Moronfolu Abayomi died from excess blood loss while he was in transit to the hospital. The bullet had penetrated his lungs. Delfonso himself was hospitalized, but the Lagos big boy refused to be treated and died 6 days later on August 31, 1923. The barrister's young widow, Oyinkansola, was devastated and refused to love any man again until 6 years later, in 1929, when a young doctor, Kofo Abayomi John, showed her a love greater than her late husband's and asked for her hand in marriage. Oyinkansola would only agree to get married only on one condition, that Kofo Abayomi John bore the name of her late husband, that is Abayomi, and relinquish his own name, John. Surprisingly, he agreed, and they got married the next year in 1930. They would be married for the next 48 years until Sir Kofo Abayomi's death on January 1st, 1979. He was 82. Lady Oyinkansola Abayomi would live to the ripe old age of 93. The Kofo Abayomi Street in Victoria Island, Lagos, is named in his honor. Kofo Adekunle Kofo Abayomi, the 10th of July, 1896, the 1st of January, 1979, was a Nigerian ophthalmologist and politician. He was one of the founders of the nationalist Nigerian youth movement in 1934 and went on to have a distinguished public service career. Most people don't know that a plane hijack has ever happened in Nigeria. Yes, it has, and it happened on October 25, 1993. This is the story about it. This is a story of how young Nigerians hijacked Nigerian Airways on October 25, 1993, because they were dissatisfied by the annulment of the June 12th elections by the military head of state, General Ibrahim Babangida, on October 25, 1993. 4 dissatisfied Nigerian teenagers hijacked a Nigerian Airways Airbus, A310 that was flying from Lagos to Abuja, and diverted the plane to Niamey, Niger. They were dissatisfied with the annulment of the June 12th elections by the head of state, General Ibrahim Babangida. The young Nigerians, Richard Ogundaru was 19, Kabir Adenuga was 18, Benneth Oluwadisi was 20, and Amp Kenny Rasak Lawal was 19. They all unassumingly boarded the flight at MMA alongside other passengers. About 16 minutes before landing, they waited until the pilot announced that passengers should fasten their seatbelts and prepare for landing. The next thing the passengers heard was, "Ladies and gentlemen, this plane has been taken over by the movement for the advancement of democracy. Remain calm, we will not harm you. You will be told where the plane will land you. You do not move or you die." The leader of the hijackers, Richard Ogundaru, a 19-year-old, walked into the cockpit and seized the process, and then one other followed. 2 remained to watch over the passengers. When he got to the cockpit, the pilot knew immediately this was an attack, so he had to obey the instructions given to him. Ogundaru then asked the pilot to divert the aircraft straight to Germany. The pilot convinced him the plane did not carry sufficient fuel to cross over the Atlantic, and then suggested they divert to a nearby country, Niger, or they will crash, and everybody dies. The 2 hijackers told the pilot what they wanted was where they could give publicity to their reason for the hijack. They told him they wanted Germany because they could have good press coverage that would support their democratic cause for Nigeria. Everybody would die. But that couldn't happen because of the fuel shortage. They agreed to land in Niamey, Niger Republic. Upon landing, the hijackers found themselves surrounded by hundreds of armed Nigerian soldiers at the airport. They had earlier distributed their demands in pamphlets among the passengers, calling on the Nigerian government to overturn the annulment of the June 12th election. They gave the government 72 hours to meet their demands, or else they would set the plane ablaze. To show they were not ready to kill anyone so long Gulf listened to them, they released 34 of the 193 passengers, among whom were top Nigerian government officials. The leader of the hijackers spoke to a BBC correspondent. The correspondent asked what they were fighting for, and he told him they wanted to actualize the mandate given by the Nigerian people to MKO Abiola. Nigerian government sent 24 delegates to come and talk to the hijackers, but none of them entered the aircraft to talk to them. Instead, they were in the hotel, asking them to come down. The Nigerian soldiers did not storm the plane because the hijackers claimed to have rigged the plane with explosives, and so began negotiations, keeping the remaining passengers hostage. For 3 days, the hijackers and the passengers fed on coffee and biscuits. At some point, they ran out of water for coffee, and one passenger demanded for water. Under the guise of bringing them water and food, the Nigerian soldiers eventually realized the hijackers were not armed, and under the cover of darkness, they stormed the plane. The 4 teenagers were arrested, cuffed hands behind their backs, and taken straight to a prison cell. The hijackers spoke neither Hausa nor French, and nobody made any attempt to question them in English. They were denied food for days. The hijackers were remanded in Niamey prison for 9 years before they were released in 2001. The end.
Story of Harrison Okin. The Nigerian man who survived 3 harrowing days under the sea. Some stories touch your heart and make you marvel at the unbelievable things that have happened to people, and this is one of them. In 2013, Harrison Okin was working as a cook on a tugboat off the Nigerian coast. The boat was stabilizing an oil tanker and had a crew of 12 people on board. An ocean swell came out of nowhere and slammed into the smaller boat, immediately capsizing it and sending it sinking into the ocean depths. With the boat went the entire crew, sadly locked in their rooms as they sunk towards a sure death. A lucky coincidence may have saved his life. The rooms of the boat were locked as a security practice, as pirates often rob the boats in that region. They locked the doors to keep the contents and the passengers safe. This worked to everyone's detriment, as the entire crew were asleep in their chambers. Except Harrison Okin. It was this exact moment that he'd found himself on the toilet and was literally sitting there when the boat got hit by the wave. He'd gotten up early and was getting ready to start cooking breakfast for the crew. The jolting ship tossed him from the bathroom and bounced him around the ship as the boat aggressively sank down. When the vessel finally settled at the bottom of the ocean, Harrison was lucky enough to stumble into an air pocket. He managed to find 2 mattresses to stack on top of each other and stayed above the rising water in his tiny little chamber. He spent the next 60 hours floating in an air pocket. It makes me nauseous just thinking about it. If Harrison Okin was claustrophobic or scared of deep water, chances are he would not have made it. It was because he stayed calm that he was able to survive for 60 hours with no food or water, and almost no air. The bubble of air that he found surely saved his life, but it would have not lasted for much longer. Given the small area he was in, the rising water, and the elapsed time, the air he was breathing was becoming more and more concentrated with carbon dioxide. By the time they rescued him, he was almost out of time. They have no idea how the air pocket maintained itself for so long. The diving crew that set out to collect the bodies from the shipwreck got to the boat almost exactly 60 hours after the vessel went down. Imagine the guy who found him. He was swimming through the ship's interior when a hand reached out and touched him, gently so as to not scare him. Harrison Okin was calm and cool, and just really freaking grateful that they were there to rescue him. They had to be super careful with him, as he'd been in such deep water for so long. He'd absorbed potentially fatal amounts of nitrogen, and if they brought him suddenly to the surface, he could have easily died. The crew equipped him with a special suit and started his ascent back into life above water. He passed out on the way up, but survived to tell his story. He spent 2 days in a decompression chamber and suffered various trauma responses like nightmares and insatiable hunger. But he made it. However, it wasn't until they rescued him and brought him to the surface that they informed him of the bad news. He was the sole survivor. While he was under the water, he thought of his family, his mother, and his wife. He didn't have access to any of them, but what he did have access to was his faith. He prayed, and God was actually there to answer. After such an ordeal, the trauma naturally stayed around for a long time. Harrison suffered awful nightmares. He'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like his bed was sinking into the water. Even though he never wanted to go near the ocean again, Harrison Okin abandoned his fear and became a certified commercial diver in 2015. Here's the beauty of it: the rescue diver who discovered him at the bottom of the sea was the one to present him with his diploma. I hope you enjoyed the story. The story of how Fela Kuti was deported from Ghana in 1978. Nigerian African musical legend Fela Anikulapo Kuti went into exile to Ghana after he, together with his family, were brutalized and his house was burned down by Nigeria's military government in 1977. The military attack on Fela Kuti and his family was due to Fela using his music as a weapon to expose and denounce the extremely corrupt Nigerian military government. Nigeria's head of state at the time of the attack on Fela and his family was Olusegun Obasanjo. So, having been made homeless, Fela traveled to Ghana and soon began playing at the Apollo Theatre in Accra. Fela's song, Zombie, had just been released and was already big in Ghana. The song mocked soldiers for obeying orders without thinking and acting mindlessly. Ghana then had a military government led by General Achempong, and students were singing Zombie to mock the soldiers who were ruling at the time. Fela considered Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah to be his greatest hero, being in Ghana. He started preaching Nkrumahism. Nkrumah's ideas, all of this combined to get him into trouble with the military government because at the time, Ghanaian students were seriously agitating against the Achempong government, which they saw to be corrupt. Fela began meeting the student leaders and delivered lectures to them. After one such meeting where Fela delivered a 3-hour lecture to the student leaders of 4 of Ghana's universities.
Not been anybody in this whole politics in Africa. Only 2 people have walked on the streets to follow people to where they are going. Nkrumah and my mother. What are you talking about? All this nonsense that you have hanging around here. They sit down in cars, man. This government threw my mother out of window, Mrs. Fumilayo Anikulapo Kuti, who fought her blood for this country on the streets. Them burn many houses. Them burn my house too. Them kill my mama. So I carry the coffin. I waka waka waka. Them waka waka waka. We go Wabalerinde. We go down barrack.
The leaders issued a public declaration which alerted the military government to what Fela was up to. fearing how popular and influential Fela had become in Ghana, especially with the students and also because of his song anti-military song, Zombie. The Achimpong government deported Fela Kuti from Ghana in 1978.
Contrary to what you may have been told, Nigerians did not fold their hands and watch the British Royal Niger Company take over the country. Many people fought back, and this is the story of the 31-year Ekumeku movement. When the British Empire, through the Royal Niger Company, came to Nigeria and started gaining influence in 1807, they only had one mission: to gain control of all of Nigeria's economic resources. And they did get control of these resources, mostly through force. This brute force was applied across the protectorates and colony later known as Nigeria. This is the story of how one tribal group resisted the British Army in a way they had never seen before. The rarely documented struggle between the British and a united underground Igbo resistance group called the Ekumeku lasted for 31 years. The origins of the Ekumeku movement. In the late 1880s, shortly after the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where European superpowers partitioned African countries, the Royal Niger Company, RNC, a British firm trading in the Niger area, was expanding their domination from Lagos towards western Igboland, which included the Niger Delta and Asaba. While British traders were doing business with locals before the conference, the power dynamics shifted even further in the colonizers' favor after the conference. They made all the laws, determined trading, with whom to trade, how much to trade, and lived as overlords in places where they were only welcomed through the force of their guns. There were claims that RNC exploited its monopoly far in excess of what it could have made in a free trade situation and spread terror, visiting the slightest whiff of local dissent with venom. In 1888, half of Asaba was decimated, and Obosi, a day's walk away in what is now Anambra State, was razed to the ground the following year. In both cases, the RNC alleged that the Asaba and Obosi people were involved in human sacrifice, hence the high-handed treatment. To stop human sacrifice, the soldiers lived off the people's livestock and food crops, and sexually assaulted the women. This led to a lot of resentment. Why was the Niger Delta special in the 1800s? The British were attracted to the Niger Delta, then called the Oil Rivers Protectorate, because of its resource, palm oil. But why was it such an asset? In the 19th century, palm oil was useful for many industrial processes. It was used as an industrial lubricant in tin plate production, street lighting, and as the fatty semi-solid for candle making and soap production. Palm oil made certain breakthroughs in soap chemistry and production possible. Now let's get back to the story. Despite their brash treatment of locals, the British were surprised to meet resistance from locals. These were located across the country and far into Igbo land in the east. But the ones that stunned the armed Brits were the Anioma people of present-day Delta State. The Aniomas had gotten word of how the British established courts, introduced Christianity, and even selected local chiefs against the people's will in other places. For the Aniomas, this was unacceptable, and they were not going down without a fight, so they went to war. A British attack on Ndoni village in 1870 and Onitsha Ado in 1897 set the pace for the rest of the war as one of guns and bloodshed. The war would last in two waves, 1883 to 1902, when the locals first organized and fought back, and from 1904 to 1914. The Ekumeku movement, meaning don't speak about it, was comprised of the Otu Okorobịa. These were young men from various Igbo villages in the nearby Niger Delta communities. They formed the Ekumeku Secret Organization, the vigilante group which fought the British. The name was given due to the stealth which the men used to fight. Unlike the British soldiers and mercenaries who had great firepower, the locals were limited in the scope of weaponry. They instead devised guerrilla attacking styles, which took the Brits by surprise, leading to a series of defeats. The strength and downfall of the Ekumeku. The strength of the movement simply lay in unity, skill, and numbers. Before 1883, the Anioka had a dispute with the Igbuzo clan, which had lasted for decades. But seeing the power of British arms and ammunition, they decided that they could not fight the war individually. The tribes instead decided to make an alliance. Other kingdoms such as Onitsha Ado, now present-day Onitsha, also joined the movement. However, Britain's superiority in firearms would eventually come to play as the war protracted. Picture of Ekumeku warriors. Opinion Nigeria. In December 1902, the British laid a preemptive strike which destroyed a large number of towns and imprisoned their leaders. As British officers were burning villages accused of taking part in the resistance cooled off at this point. This was presumably to regroup. In 1904, the Ikumiku rose again, but they defended their towns instead of fighting together as they once did. Despite their skills in combat, the British found it easier to destroy their homelands. In 1911, a roundup of Ikumiku leaders led to imprisonments. By 1914, when Nigeria's northern and southern protectorates and the colony of Lagos were joined as one country, the Ikumeku fire had only started to die. There are no official record on locals killed during the resistance, but it was one of the most devastating resistance to British occupation in Nigeria, leading to the death of a commander, H.C. Chapman. The colonial government's Collective Punishment Ordinance, CPO, a law to punish an entire village suspected of entertaining the activities of the Ekumeku, was pivotal to ensuring the resistance did not return a third time. The impact of the Ekumeku movement. It served as an inspiration for other countries. Many historians believe that the Ekumeku movement inspired the Kenyan Mau Mau Rebellion of 1952. While it is not often spoken of, the Ekumeku movement proves that the ancestors didn't take their chains lying down. Written by Chiamaka Dyke. If you enjoy our contents, support us. Story of Dorico, one of the notorious criminal that terrorized eastern Nigeria. Born Okwudili Ndiwe, 22 years old, aka Dorico Nwamama, he hailed from Onitsha in Anambra State and had risen from a pickpocket to a dreaded crime king. After Dorico killed Chiajina, another hoodlum, before Dorico rose to prominence, he hailed from Aguleri, Anambra State. Dorico was based in Abuja and only visited the east to unleash terror. After his successful operations, he would return to his base with his loot, safe on the laps of power, luxury, and comfort. Dorico once used the towns of Umuleri in Anambra as well as Agbor in Delta states as his main hideouts. From there, he would send letters threatening the police for killing men of his gang. He placed a great trust in the charms prepared for him by the native doctors and always boasted of his invincibility, that no man born of woman could kill him. Dairy, as was also called, robbed banks, carted away millions of naira, and killed many in the process. He and his sinister gang also robbed luxurious interstate buses. On Decanter 2000, Dorico attacked a 59-seater bus coming from Lagos at the popular Upper Iweka in Onitsha. After robbing the passengers, he decided to kill all of them. Only 4 survived. That was the height of it all. The then governor of Anambra State, Chinwoke Mbadinuju Odera, had no solution to the menace of Dorico because he was said to be invisible and could not be arrested. In May 2001, the Anambra State Police Command officially launched Operation Dorico, a manhunt aimed at capturing the rampaging Dorico and his gang members at all costs. The police arrested some of Dorico's men, most importantly, Amobi, his bike driver, but he was still elusive as he kept robbing, killing at will, and kidnapping people for a ransom. With the failure of police and other security forces to capture Dorico Nwamama, Governor Mbadinuju brought in Bakassi boys. In June 2001, Dorico attacked a police station to acquire weapons for a bank robbery in Asaba. He also began to work with other gangs to execute more daring robberies. A certain morning, the well-prepared Nigerian police and the Bakassi boys turned the heat up on him. They stormed his Abuja residence unannounced and raided it. He escaped, but 2 of his trusted warriors were killed in the operation. Desperate, Doro chose a nomadic way of living as he sensed that his life was in a serious danger with the Bakassi boys' involvement. It was during one of his trips that the Bakassi boys got a tip-off and mounted an ambush that led to his arrest. On a fateful Tuesday, July 3, 2001, the Bakassi boys got an intelligent info that Doro was on his way from his hideout in Agbor to Onitsha. They laid a strong ambush at the popular head bridge for his commute. He was identified in a bus and arrested. The city of Onitsha was thrown into jubilation at the news of his capture. The Nigerian police requested that he be released for investigation and prosecution, but the Bakassi boys did not trust the police to justice to him. On Monday, 9th of July 2001, 6 days after Doro was captured, the Bakassi boys drove in their convoy around Onitsha town and ended at the Ochanja Market Junction along Upper Iweka Road. There, they unveiled the big meat, Doro. Onitsha residents trooped to the junction to catch a glimpse of the man who had turned their lives into a nightmare. Doro was handed a microphone to address the teeming crowd. In his words, "My name is Adi, alias Doro Nwamama. I appeal to you, Ndi Anambra, please don't kill me. It's true I have killed many, but don't kill me. I don't like evil. I will repent," he said. "It was when I killed Chiajina that people thought I was a strong guy. I trust Bakassi boys, they're strong. Please mercy for me," he echoed in a pitiable tone. What followed remains one of the most macabre displays of public execution in the history of Nigeria. A cutlass handled by one of the Bakassi boys went up and came down with an unforgiving thud, landing on Doro's slim neck. In a twinkle of an eye, Doro Nwamama was beheaded. The crowd shouted in approval and chanted songs in praise of the heroic Bakassi boys. Doro's body was cut into pieces and set on fire. The chase and capture of Doro inspired the 2001 movie Isakaba. Credit: Igbo History and Facts. Killers exposed: the gruesome murder of Delegiwa in 1986. Who was Delegiwa? Delegiwa was a renowned Nigerian journalist and the editor-in-chief of Newswatch magazine, which he co-founded with Ray Ekpu, Dan Agbese, and Yakubu Muhammad in 1984. Delegiwa was known to be an ardent lover of truth. In his days, he devoted his time to exposing the corrupt and illegal deeds of the then Nigerian government and politicians, which earned him the people's recognition, support, and trust. It was alleged that the Nigerian government saw Delegiwa as a threat and eliminated him to keep their deeds out of the news. On the 19th of October, 1986, Delegiwa was killed in his house, No. 25, Talabi Crescent, off Talabi Street, Adeniyi Jones Avenue, by a letter bomb which was said to have been delivered by Buba Marwa, a former military administrator of Lagos State. The bomb explosion at first left Delegiwa seriously injured and later killed him, while Mr. Kayode Soyinka, Delegiwa's colleague who was present during the bomb blast, was temporarily deafened. Gloria Okon's case. Delegiwa was said to have been working on the case of one Gloria Okon, who was smuggled secretly out of Nigeria after her arrest by the Drug Enforcement Agency for peddling hard drugs. Delegiwa, known for his unwillingness to stay subservient to the government, did not desist from fishing out the truth about Gloria Okon, despite several warnings to back off. This supposedly led to his untimely death. Another source claimed that Delegiwa was working on a secret video clip of Mama Nvatsa's testimonies shortly before his execution. Several issues sprang up about those behind the assassination of Delegiwa. An interview Professor Tayemiwo Ogunade granted Sahara reporters in 2009. In the interview, Professor Tayemiwo Ogunade claimed that it was Buba Marwa who delivered the letter to Delegiwa, and this Buba Marwa was one of Ibrahim Babangida's boys. The interview Sahara reporters, "Do you know who delivered the bomb that killed Delegiwa?" Ogunade, I believe that Buba Marwa did it. Some Maman Vatsa boys told the full story in New York during a visit to my college to lobby our college to accept to train Nigerian military officers. Ambassador Olusola was on that entourage. My informant told me Delegiwa was killed because he was in possession of a tape containing Vatsa's testimony before the military tribunal. For 4 hours, Vatsa requested to tell the full story about how the Babangida regime was operating and his knowledge of the workings of IBB's mind. He pointed out that after Halilu Akilu and Colonel A.K. Togan of the military intelligence prepared the parcel, it was handed over to Buba Marwa to deliver to Delegiwa. Marwa is a well-known IBB boy, but I was the one who gave Delegiwa the tape. Sahara reporters, how did you get the tape? Ogunade. Vatsa had a copy made by his friends in the tribunal and smuggled out to me, and I loaned it to Delegiwa, who got on the case immediately. I still don't know how Delegiwa found out that I had the tape till this day. Sahara reporters, do you still have a copy? Ogunade. Yes, but you know I left Nigeria hurriedly after the death of Delegiwa. I left the tape with my aged mother, who did not know the value then. I won't say more. Let the military release that tape to the Nigerian public. Sahara reporters. Did Delegiwa return the tape to you? Ogunade. Yes, he returned it after 24 hours. Don't forget that I loaned it to him. I think he went and played it to Babangida's people, and they eliminated him after they heard the tape. Sahara reporters. What about Gloria Okan? It's been said that Delegiwa's discovery of her was the reason he was killed. Ogunade. Gloria Okan is actually Chinyere, that's her real name. She married Charles Jeff Chandler, the fellow who killed Nazeogwu and was killed a day later. Chinyere, Mariam, and Princess Ada were young friends who hung out together. They all married into the military because the military was a proud and respectable profession then. Charles Chandler, who was TIV, married Chinyere, who I think is from Imo State. IBB married Mariam from Asaba, and Maman Vatsa married the princess. So Chinyere became a widow and resorted to trading between UK and Nigeria. And then she was caught with drugs. Maman Vatsa was the person who put Chinyere on the next available flight from Kano to London, and then claimed that she was dead by parading a dead woman picked out of the mortuary. Delegiwa later found out that she was in London having delivered a baby by another man. He sent a French photographer to the place, and they saw Mariam Babangida at the event. Coyote Soyinka brought back the photographs. Dele was sitting across the table from Coyote examining the photos taken of Gloria Okan, Chinyere, Richard Chandler's wife, at the naming ceremony in London. Mariam Babangida was there. And then a letter parcel was delivered to him, and he said excitedly that it must be from Mr. President, referring to the discussions he had with IBB days earlier. The bomb exploded and severed his lower abdomen. He died a few hours later. Sahara reporters, did you ever meet Marwa again? And did you ask him about his involvement? Ogunade. Yes, Marwa was very active in the Nigerian embassy in New York. For a long time, he was the military attaché to the Nigerian mission in New York, while I was a professor of Black Studies at the City University of New York. He came to my college to sign a $30 million contract with the college so that members of the Nigerian military could attend a peace and conflict resolution program, and then be awarded a master's degree upon completion of the program. I fought bitterly against it, but the chair of the department, John Muyibi Amoda, badly wanted the money. I kept fighting, and one day the college authorities acceded to my request. When I got home, the college had dismissed me, but also I got a fax message saying that $30 million had been returned to Marwa. But between Marwa and Abacha, they never returned that money to the Nigerian treasury. They shared it. I heard between him and Abacha, over $250 million was laundered through an account used by the New York mission of the Nigerian embassy. Marwa later set up an airline with his share of the loot. When he showed up to run for president, I was the one who petitioned the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, to investigate him. He confessed to money laundering in handwritten statements to the EFCC, but today he is the ambassador of Nigeria to South Africa. The police officer that investigated him, Ibrahim Magu, is permanently suspended from the police force after he was humiliated by the EFCC. It is a shameful country. End of interview. Those responsible for Delegiwa's death till today are yet to be officially identified, and this supposedly led to the death of his octogenarian mother, Madam Elikia Ayisat Giwa, in 2013 at the age of 87. The death of Delagiwa remains one of Nigeria's top assassinations. Credit, Old Nigeria. Story of Babatunde Folorunsho, the first armed robber to be publicly executed in Nigeria. The name Babatunde Folorunsho sounds nice and pleasant to the ears, but its bearer in history was actually a daylight terror and a nightmare to Nigerians in the early 1970s. Who was Babatunde Folorunsho? Babatunde Folorunsho was an armed robber and a hardened criminal who threatened the peace and security of Nigerians in the 1970s with his ruthless bandit group. He reigned almost the same time as the kingpin of Nigerian armed robbers, Ishola Oyanusi, also known as Dr. Rob and Kill. Babatunde Folorunsho was dubbed Baba Oni Lace, Mr. Lace, because of his strong love for lace outfits, which he even wore during robbery operations. During his horrific reign, Babatunde Folorunsho topped the list of the most wanted criminals in Nigeria. He was hunted by the police and local guards, but all to no avail. During this time, the crime rate was at its peak in the country as a result of the civil war that had just ended. Babatunde Folorunsho alias Baba Oni Lace seemed invincible, but unfortunately for him, he was nabbed by the police during a robbery operation on a fateful day in 1971. He was charged with robbing one Mr. Alfred Marshall of a car. The whole nation jubilated as Babatunde Folorunsho was finally caught in the web of the law. On the 8th and 13th of April 1971, Babatunde Folorunsho was tried and found guilty of highway robbery. The judge, James Agbula Ohomo, sentenced him to death by firing squad. The execution day came. It was on the 24th of July, 1971. Thousands of Nigerians rushed to the popular bar beach in Lagos where the execution was to take place. That was the first of its kind in Nigeria. It was around 1 p.m., and the sun was shining. Babatunde Folorunsho and two other criminals were conveyed to the execution ground in a lorry. The crowd was anxious and excited as well. In chains, Babatunde Folorunsho, who was dressed in lace, and other criminals were walked to the stakes and tied up. The other two criminals were Joseph Ilobo and Williams Alders Oyazimo. Joseph Ilobo, unlike Folorunsho, didn't accept fate easily. He protested till his last moment. At a point, he looked at the crowd and said, "Are all these people here to see me die? Ah, this is a wicked world. I have not committed any crime." Williams Alders Oyazimo was a sub-lieutenant in the Nigerian Navy. He protested his innocence in tears. He said, "If you search your conscience, you will know that a naval officer of my status will never go in the dead of the night to steal. I'll die today, innocent of the crime for which I am condemned." He was approached by the military chaplain, Colonel Pedro Martins, and asked to pray for forgiveness, but he said, "Father, I am innocent. My blood will cleanse my family, and my children will prosper." Oyazimo's last words touched Nigerians. It was such a pathetic moment. According to a source, Williams Alders Oyazimo could have been truly innocent. His execution was likely a result of personal feud with some officers of higher ranks. He and Joseph Ilobo were accused of robbing one Alhaja Taibatu Opin of a loudspeaker and record player valued at the equivalent of N320. They both pleaded not guilty, but were sentenced to death anyway. However, Oyazimo's words did not make the executors change their minds. A loud voice let out the command. Joseph Ilobo screamed, "Make Una go call that Alhaja, make she come see we die." Then a rain of bullets fell on the condemned trio's bodies. Their lifeless bodies were inspected, untied, and then taken away for burial. The whole of Nigeria celebrated the death of Babatunde Folorunsho, aka Baba Oni Lace, only to welcome more of his kind some years later.
I hope you enjoyed this story.
The story of Ajala Olabisi, known as Ajala Travel. When someone in Nigeria liked to travel a lot, sometimes Yoruba people call them Ajala. This is the story of Ajala Olabisi, known as Ajala Travel, was famous in 1950s for traveling around the world. He traveled to more than 80 countries with his scooter. Ajala was a happy-go-lucky globetrotter and socialite who put Nigeria on the world map, as he traversed the globe on his motor scooter. A very Nigerian man at heart and a proud African in soul, Ajala shattered all records of travel, voyaging into lands that no black person had ever seen, not to talk of setting their feet there. Ajala had the world in his pockets, and the world bowed at his guts. From the physical boundaries of nations to the piercing demarcations of racism, Ajala tore through them all. Ajala explored the unexplored and charted the hitherto uncharted area of the world. He wined and dined with heads of state and leaders, including the late Tafawa Balewa, the Prime Minister of Nigeria, and so many other great leaders. In the year 1954, the famous Ajala the Traveler climbed an 80-foot radio tower and threatened to jump down if his deportation process proceed in United States of America. He later jumped down from about 15 feet and sprained his back. He was nonetheless deported, but to London instead. While in London on April 27, 1957, the adventurer began his globe-trotting for 6 years, visiting what is believed to be 87 countries on a scooter Vespa motorcycle. Ajala the Traveler checks for direction from West Berlin Custom in 1957 when he was touring the world. Unfortunately, the great globetrotter Olabisi Ajala died on February 2, 1999, in abject poverty despite his fame. This would have not been the case if YouTube and other social media monetization platforms existed during his time. Drop your comments about this story by replying.
Story of Osun Osogbo Festival, where only virgin is allowed to be Aruba. The current Aruba Osuntomi Oyetunji is the young daughter of the sitting Ataoja of Osogbo. She took over from Abolade Oyewale, who carried the sacrifice calabash to the river goddess and was herself considered a goddess for 10 years. Every August, Osogbo town plays host to one of the most interesting festivals in the world, the Osun Osogbo Festival, since the town became host of the country's second World Heritage Site. The gravitation pull of adventurous stories has become hard to resist. It's a festival that allows tourists to discover the plains, the streams and forests of Osogbo, the land of Oroki, famed for its indigo dye, aro. The 1-month-long festival is believed to be a covenant between the indigenes and the water goddess, during which time the indigenes thank the water goddess for the peace, tranquility and prosperity bestowed on the town by the goddess, and also to ask for more favors from the goddess for the next year. The Aruba is led by the most senior Osun priestess and Aworo Osun from the premises of the palace of the reigning Ataoja of Osogbo, enveloped on both sides by a formidable human fence, who must ensure that she gets to her destination without incident and, more importantly, with the calabash intact. As the tradition goes, the virgin chosen is the personification of the goddess Osun and must not stumble. Aruba is carefully chosen by the priest. Sources say that as soon as these votary maids are picked, they live under the watchful eyes of the Ataoja during the periods that they serve as Aruba. Once an Aruba is picked, she more or less becomes Kabiesi's daughter. She lives under the care and watchful eyes of the Kabiesi. This is because she must not know any man while she still bears the Osun calabash, so they don't enjoy some freedom that their mates enjoy. The Arubas are allowed to quit when they are matured enough to get married. The practice over the years has been that the Aruba must be a virgin, a spinster from the king's extended family, and must be chosen for the role by Ifa divination picked from ages 11 or 12 and dedicated to the service of the river goddess Yeye Osun until she eventually gets matured. Usually, she would serve the town for about 3 to 4 years before she grows into womanhood. But with civilization and most of them attending schools, the Aruba now serves the town or the river goddess for over 10 years for those picked at tender years. Aruba is not allowed to eat certain foods like fish, snail, guinea corn because Osun does not take them. Whilst lots of restrictions are placed on the social life of the votary maid, she is allowed to go to school and mingle with her friends. Though spiritual, being Aruba does come with its own perks, such as enjoying preferential treatment in school, one of which is sporting long hair while other students kept short hair, and getting whatever she desires from the ruling king. Fellow students are wary of her, but for those who are close to her, a former Aruba once said, she is completely harmless. She wore school uniform all through her years of studies, except for 2 bracelets on her wrist which should never be taken off. Of course, that caused some few skirmishes with teachers, of which one physically yanked it off, and the consequences were immediately devastating, she recanted.